Marcus Thompson seemed to have everything. A successful tech entrepreneur, he had built his wealth from the ground up, turning his startup into a multi-million-dollar business. He lived in a luxurious home with his wife, Jessica, and their young son, Jake. To the outside world, they were the epitome of a perfect family, beautiful house, well-behaved child, and a loving, doting wife. The Thompsons were admired by their friends, envied by their neighbors, and even revered by those in their business circles. But beneath this seemingly perfect life, something darker was brewing. Jessica, his wife, had always been the picture of grace, elegance, and charm. She was the ideal partner, the supportive wife who managed their home and attended every charity event, always by Marcus's side. Yet, behind the sparkling smiles and the perfect social media posts, there was a growing unease in Jessica. The life she had once been content with no longer satisfied her. She didn't feel fulfilled, and as the years passed, she began to resent the very man who had given her everything. Her resentment wasn't born from the life Marcus had provided, but from something deeper, a hunger for power, for independence, and, above all, for wealth. She had spent years living in Marcus's shadow, and it gnawed at her. She felt trapped, bound by the golden cage of a perfect life. She had grown tired of playing the role of the supportive wife. Jessica wanted more. In her loneliness and growing dissatisfaction, Jessica had found an unlikely confidant, Laura, her best friend. Laura was everything that Jessica was not: bold, brash, and unafraid to speak her mind. Laura had always been there for Jessica, listening to her complaints about Marcus, offering comfort when things weren't going well at home. But unbeknownst to Marcus, Laura was a woman with her own motivations, her own ambitions, and she shared a dark, dangerous desire with Jessica, the desire for Marcus's wealth. It started as casual conversations, small whispers of dissatisfaction with Marcus, of how he didn't appreciate what he had, how he was blind to Jessica's needs. But these whispers soon grew into something much darker. One night, over a glass of wine, Jessica and Laura discussed their frustrations. Laura made an offhand comment. "What if you didn't have to deal with Marcus anymore? What if all of this, the money, the house, the lifestyle, was yours without him standing in the way?" Jessica laughed it off at first, but the seed had been planted. She began to consider it, the idea that she could finally be free from Marcus, not just emotionally, but financially. Laura, seeing the opportunity, took it one step further. "You're stuck in this marriage, Jessica. You know it. But Marcus doesn't have to be here anymore. You could have everything. You could be your own woman again." The idea festered in Jessica's mind, growing into a plan. At first, it was nothing more than a fleeting thought, a fantasy of escape. But as she spent more time with Laura, the idea became more real, more possible. They could make it happen. Marcus's life could be the price of her freedom, her wealth. And Laura, as her closest confidant, would be by her side every step of the way. Jessica knew it wouldn't be easy. It had to look like an accident. No one could suspect her. No one could trace it back to her. She had to be careful, meticulous. But for the first time in years, Jessica felt a rush, a sense of power. She would take control of her life, no longer bound by the man who had once given her everything. Laura was on board. Jessica could feel the tension between them as they planned the details. Laura would help her get rid of Marcus. It would be perfect. The insurance money, the inheritance, the control of everything Marcus had worked for, all of it would be theirs. They would be rich. But there was one thing that Jessica hadn't accounted for: Marcus himself. He was no fool. In the weeks leading up to the plan, he had sensed a shift in Jessica. She was distant, distracted. He noticed the subtle changes in her behavior, the way she became more and more consumed by something he couldn't understand. And yet, he believed in her. He trusted her. He loved her. One evening, while Marcus was working late in his office, he called Laura. The conversation was brief but telling. "Laura, I'm worried about Jessica," he confessed. "She's acting strange, like she's hiding something from me. Do you think I should be concerned?" Laura, ever the skilled manipulator, brushed it off. "Marcus, you're probably just overthinking things. You know how women are, emotional, stressed out with the holidays coming up. Jessica's probably just going through a phase. Don't worry too much." But Marcus was worried. Something didn't sit right with him. He trusted Laura, though. He trusted both of them. So, when Jessica came home that evening, he didn't press her. He didn't push her to talk. He just accepted her silence, oblivious to the deadly plan she was about to set in motion. The tension was building. Jessica had already set the plan in motion, making sure that all the pieces would fall into place. Marcus's life was hanging by a thread, and he had no idea. The trust he had placed in Jessica, the love he thought they shared, was about to be shattered forever. As Jessica prepared for the night ahead, she found herself looking at Marcus in a new light, no longer as the man she loved, but as an obstacle, a means to an end. She knew what she had to do, and there was no turning back. The stage was set. The night would come, and with it, the death of a man who had been blind to the woman sitting across from him. And when the morning came, Jessica would be free. Free from Marcus. Free from the life she had built with him. Free to claim everything she ever wanted. But would it be enough? Would her plan work? And could she live with the consequences? The answers to these questions were still out of reach. The true story of Marcus Thompson's death had only just begun. The night Marcus Thompson died was supposed to be like any other. The evening had started with laughter, a glass of wine, and the usual chatter around the dinner table. Jessica had been charming as always, and their son Jake had his usual energy. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But there was an undercurrent of tension that neither Marcus nor Jake could sense, a darkness that hovered just beneath the surface, ready to surface at the slightest provocation. Jessica had spent the entire day preparing. She had gone through every detail in her mind, making sure nothing would go wrong. Everything had been timed to perfection, each movement, each word. She had even gone as far as to place a glass of water beside Marcus's seat, the one he always reached for without thinking. She knew he would drink it, just like he always did. The plan was simple. Marcus would drink the water. He would feel a sudden dizziness, and then, within minutes, he would collapse. She had already arranged for Laura to be at the house, waiting outside with a car ready to take Marcus's body somewhere discreet. It would look like a medical emergency gone wrong, a sudden heart attack or stroke. No one would ever suspect the truth. But as they finished their meal, Marcus suddenly stopped laughing. He had been telling a joke, but there was something in the air that made the words feel forced. He looked at Jessica, his expression softening, as if he were about to say something serious. "Jessica," he began, his voice hesitant, "I've been thinking about us. About the future. About you and me, and Jake. I don't know if I've been the best husband or father, but I've always tried. I want to be better. I want to make sure we have everything we need for the years to come." Jessica froze, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't part of the plan. She had always thought she could fool Marcus, but in that moment, she was confronted with a truth she hadn't anticipated, her guilt. It felt like an avalanche crashing down on her, but she quickly pushed it aside. She had no choice now. The deed had to be done. "Of course, Marcus," she said, her voice steady, her smile a mask of warmth. "We have everything. We're fine. Everything is fine." She reached for the glass of water beside him, making sure he didn't notice the slight tremble in her hand. She watched as he took a sip, his eyes never leaving hers. In that brief moment, Jessica saw the man she had once loved, the man who had given her everything, the man who had trusted her with his life. The guilt threatened to consume her, but she shoved it down, buried it deep inside. But something was off. Marcus didn't seem to notice that the water tasted strange, tasted wrong. Maybe it was the way it felt too smooth, or the subtle bitterness that lingered on his tongue. Whatever it was, Marcus didn't think much of it at first. He just sat back, rubbing his temple with his fingers. Then, his face contorted, a sharp gasp escaping his lips. "Jess, I don't feel," he stammered, the words coming out sluggishly. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. She watched as Marcus's eyes began to glaze over, his hand gripping the edge of the table for support. He seemed to be fighting against something, but it was clear something was wrong. The water, the plan, was taking effect faster than she had anticipated. "Marcus." Jessica's voice was soft, but laced with feigned concern. "What's wrong?" Marcus tried to stand up, but his legs buckled underneath him. His body hit the floor with a sickening thud, the noise echoing through the silent house. Jake, who had been playing quietly in the corner, froze at the sound, his small face twisting in confusion and fear. "Dad," Jake called, his voice high-pitched and panicked. Jessica rushed to her husband's side, but only for appearances. Inside, she was filled with a strange mix of triumph and terror. She had done it. Marcus was slipping away, and there was no way back. "Marcus, stay with me," she said, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. Her mind was racing. This was supposed to be quick, clean. But Marcus was still breathing, still alive, just barely. His eyes were fluttering, his lips trembling as he tried to speak, but no words came out. She needed to act quickly. The plan had been foolproof, but now there were cracks, and she could already hear the distant sound of sirens in the back of her mind. She had to finish this, no matter what. In that moment of madness, she knew she had two choices: let Marcus live and risk everything unraveling, or finish it. With a swift movement, Jessica took his hand, squeezing it tightly, as if to give him a final moment of comfort. She whispered into his ear, words that would be his last. "You never saw me. You never knew." The doorbell rang just as she stood up, turning her back on Marcus. Laura was here. Laura would help her clean up the mess. But as Jessica moved toward the door, her mind raced. Could Marcus be saved? Could someone intervene in time? The thought flashed through her mind, but it was already too late. She had made her decision. The plan had already gone too far. Jessica opened the door to Laura, who immediately rushed inside, her eyes darting around the room. "Is he?" Laura asked, her voice tense with anticipation. "He's done," Jessica replied flatly. "We need to get him out of here before anyone notices." They didn't have much time. They quickly lifted Marcus's lifeless body, his head limp, his limbs heavy. It was a cold, methodical process, one that required precision. There was no emotion, no hesitation. They were beyond that now. This was the end of the line. Laura opened the back door, and they hurriedly carried Marcus's body to the car. The weight of what they had just done hung in the air like a thick fog. But neither of them said a word as they drove into the night, the darkness swallowing them whole. As they left the house, the sound of sirens grew louder in the distance. It was inevitable. Someone would eventually discover what had happened. Someone would find out the truth. But by then, Jessica and Laura would be long gone, far away from the wreckage they had caused. The murder had been committed. The plan had worked. But what neither of them anticipated was how quickly their lives would start to unravel. The morning after Marcus Thompson's death, the police arrived at the Thompson home. It wasn't the chaotic scene that Jessica had feared, at least not yet. They arrived in the early hours, long before Jake had woken up, before the neighbors had started their day. The quiet suburban street, which had once been filled with the laughter of children and the hum of busy lives, now felt eerie, silent, like a crime scene waiting to happen. Jessica stood at the front door, dressed in a robe, looking every bit the grieving widow. Her eyes were red from crying all night, and her voice shook when she spoke to the officers. Her lips quivered as she explained that she had found Marcus collapsed on the floor after dinner. She didn't know what had happened. He was fine, he just fell. I tried to wake him up, but nothing. I thought it was a stroke or a heart attack, but I don't know. I don't know what happened. The officers nodded, their faces unreadable. They had heard this before. People trying to explain away the death of a loved one. The problem was that the story didn't add up. The cause of Marcus's death was an obvious one. The autopsy would later reveal that Marcus Thompson had died from poisoning, a rare but unmistakable sign of foul play. But Jessica was calm, too calm. As the officers asked her routine questions, she gave straightforward answers, almost rehearsed. She answered them as if she were reading from a script, each word carefully measured to ensure no suspicion fell on her. When they asked about her relationship with her husband, she said all the right things. "We were happy. We loved each other. We had our problems, but who doesn't?" She appeared vulnerable, almost fragile, a woman who had lost her partner, her best friend, the father of her child. Her performance was impeccable. The officers left soon after, but the seed of suspicion had already been planted. They would return, of course. They always did. But they hadn't found enough to hold her, not yet. Jessica watched them drive away, her face a mask of grief. But inside, her pulse quickened. She had done it. She had killed Marcus, and so far, no one suspected a thing. Laura, on the other hand, was growing anxious. She had been in the background throughout the entire plan, but now the reality of their actions was sinking in. The car ride, the hurried disposal of Marcus's body, it had all felt so easy in the moment. But now that it was over, the consequences seemed much closer. Laura kept asking Jessica if they had done enough to cover their tracks. What if someone found out? What if the police suspected them? What if they couldn't get away with it? Jessica reassured her. We've covered everything. The body's hidden, and no one will find it. They won't even think to look for a murder. We made it look like an accident. But even as she said these words, something inside her began to crack. She had done what she had set out to do, but she didn't feel the rush of freedom she had expected. Instead, there was an emptiness, a hollow ache that gnawed at her. Was it guilt? Was it regret? No, she told herself. She had done what was necessary. Marcus had been holding her back. He had never seen her for who she truly was. This was the only way. And yet, in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was going to catch up to her, that something was going to expose her lie. Days passed, and the investigation continued. The detectives on the case, led by Detective Rachel Adams, were meticulous in their work. They hadn't been fooled by Jessica's perfect facade. They had seen it before. The grieving widow who had everything to gain from the death of her spouse. Rachel, especially, had a sharp instinct for these kinds of cases. She had seen enough in her years on the force to recognize when something was off. And Jessica Thompson's behavior had raised every red flag. Rachel had spent hours going through the evidence, and though there wasn't much to go on, she had a gut feeling that something wasn't right. The autopsy results confirmed what they had suspected. Marcus had been poisoned, carefully, deliberately. The traces of the poison were so precise that they couldn't have been accidental. Someone had planned it. But who? Detective Adams had already started to look into Jessica's background. The more she dug, the more she realized that Jessica's life wasn't as perfect as it appeared. Jessica had grown up in a wealthy family, but had never quite lived up to the expectations of her parents. She had been married to Marcus for nearly 10 years, but Rachel's research uncovered something unexpected, a history of financial strain. Marcus's success had been the glue holding everything together, and Jessica had benefited from it all. But she had never been satisfied, not deep down. Then, there was Laura, Jessica's best friend. Rachel knew she had to speak to her. If there was anyone who might know what had really happened, it was Laura. The two women were inseparable, or so it seemed. The bond they shared, the secrecy, they were always together. But Rachel knew that sometimes the most trusted confidants were the ones who hid the darkest secrets. Rachel reached out to Laura, arranging a meeting at the police station. Laura, looking every bit the image of the concerned friend, arrived dressed in black, her face drawn, her eyes red from what she claimed was mourning. But Rachel saw through the performance. She'd seen it all before. The grief-stricken friend who suddenly knew too much, whose answers always seemed a little too rehearsed. "I'm just so sorry," Laura said, sitting across from Rachel. "I can't believe Marcus is gone. I never thought something like this would happen. He was such a good man. He didn't deserve this." Rachel's gaze never wavered. "I'm sorry for your loss, Laura, but we need to go over everything. The timeline, the events leading up to Marcus's death." Laura fidgeted in her seat, her fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve nervously. "I've already told you everything. I wasn't there. I didn't know anything. Jessica and Marcus were happy, at least, that's what she said. I never would have imagined. I never thought she'd." Rachel leaned in, her voice steady. "Laura, we know you were close to Jessica. We know you were both at the house the night Marcus died. Tell me everything. Was there anything unusual? Anything that seemed off?" Laura hesitated, the lie hanging on the tip of her tongue. But the pressure was building. The police were closing in. They had evidence. They had motive. And soon, they would have the truth. As Laura opened her mouth to speak, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her own betrayal. Detective Rachel Adams sat across from Laura in the sterile, fluorescent-lit interrogation room. The sound of a ticking clock seemed deafening in the silence. Laura's once confident demeanor had crumbled. The walls of her perfectly curated world were starting to cave in. Every word she had spoken, every false smile she had given, was now under scrutiny. There was no way out. Rachel's calm, piercing gaze never left Laura. The tension between them was palpable, thickening with every second. Laura's hands trembled slightly as she clenched them together in her lap, struggling to keep up the facade of grief. The performance she had put on for the police, for Jessica, was no longer enough. "I've already told you everything," Laura said weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't there that night. I didn't know what was happening." Rachel's voice was cool and unyielding. "Laura, we know you were there. We've pieced everything together. Jessica's statements don't match up with the evidence. You were at the house, and you know more than you're letting on." You need to tell me the truth." Laura's eyes flickered nervously to the door, as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. The air in the room felt thick, as though the weight of her lies were pressing down on her. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. The room felt suddenly too small, and the burden of what she had done, what they had done, was becoming too much to bear. For a long moment, Laura said nothing. Then, her voice cracked. "I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered. I didn't want him to die." Rachel leaned in closer. "Then why did you help her, Laura? Why did you agree to be a part of this?" Laura closed her eyes, her shoulders slumping as the floodgates opened. "She was my best friend. I believed her when she said she wanted a way out. She said Marcus was controlling her, that he was suffocating her. She wasn't happy. I wanted to help her, but I didn't realize what that would mean. I didn't realize it would end like this." Tears welled up in Laura's eyes as she recounted the events. "Jessica came to me one night, just after Marcus had been getting more and more distant from her. She was angry, so angry. She said she couldn't stand living in his shadow anymore. He had everything, money, power, and he didn't even notice her. She wanted to be free. And then she started talking about how he could be replaced, how if he was gone, she would be free to live her life, to do whatever she wanted. And I believed her. I thought she deserved it. She kept saying we'd both be rich. We'd be free." Laura paused, wiping her eyes, her hands still trembling. "She said all the right things, Rachel. She knew exactly how to manipulate me. I thought I was helping her, that I was doing the right thing. And when it came to the actual plan, when it came to putting the poison in his water, I hesitated. But Jessica convinced me. She promised everything would be fine, that no one would suspect a thing. She said it would look like an accident. It was going to be quick, easy, and then we'd both get everything we wanted. She said we'd be out of the mess, together." Rachel watched as Laura's words tumbled out, her tone breaking with guilt and fear. She had known the truth all along, but hearing it from Laura's lips made it all the more real. The lie had been built on layers of deceit, manipulation, betrayal, and ultimately, murder. And after Marcus drank the water, what happened? Rachel asked, her voice still calm, though the severity of the situation had begun to sink in. Laura shook her head, almost in disbelief. "He started feeling sick. His face, his expression, I didn't know what to do. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to die. But Jessica, she was so calm. She said he would be fine. We just needed to make it look like an accident." She was already preparing to take him out of the house, before anyone realized what had happened. Her voice faltered as she spoke the next words. "But when Marcus collapsed, I saw his face. He wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. That's when I knew. I knew we had crossed a line we couldn't come back from. I didn't want him to die. I didn't want any of this." Rachel leaned back in her chair, processing Laura's confession. There was a weight to her words, a depth of realization that could never be undone. The truth had spilled out, and now there was no turning back. "So why are you telling me this now?" Rachel asked, her tone softer but still filled with the quiet intensity of someone who had been waiting for this moment. "Why confess? What changed?" Laura looked at the detective, her eyes filled with tears. "I can't live with it anymore. I can't keep lying. I thought Jessica and I would get away with it, but every day it's been eating me alive. I thought she'd protect me, but now I know she won't. She's already planning her next move, and I'm not sure where I stand anymore. I'm not sure I can trust her." Rachel's expression hardened. "You need to tell me everything, Laura. Where's Marcus's body?" Laura shook her head, her voice a whisper. "I don't know. Jessica handled everything. She said she would take care of it. She had a place in mind, somewhere no one would find him. Somewhere far away from here." Rachel stood up, signaling for the officers outside to enter the room. "Laura, you've made the right decision, but there's more to come. You're not getting away with this. You'll be held accountable for your role in Marcus's death." As Laura was escorted out of the room, Detective Adams stood still for a moment, reflecting on everything she had just heard. It was over. The truth had been exposed. But what about Jessica? What about the mastermind behind it all? She knew that Jessica was the key to everything. Without her, this crime wouldn't have happened. Laura had cracked, but Jessica was still free, still out there, living her life like nothing had changed. The hunt for her was just beginning. Rachel had one goal now: to find Jessica before she could disappear, to make sure that justice would be served, no matter the cost. Detective Rachel Adams didn't have to wait long. The confession had tipped the balance, and now Jessica's life was unraveling at a rapid pace. Rachel's instincts had been right. There was something in Jessica's calmness, her too-perfect morning, that had always seemed off. She had kept the mask in place for so long, but behind it lay a woman who believed she was above the law, above suspicion. Now, the law was closing in. Jessica Thompson had tried to keep her life under control after Marcus's death. She thought she had escaped, that the wealth she now controlled would be enough to buy her freedom. But freedom had never been the goal. Power had always been the goal. In the days following Marcus's death, Jessica had put on a show for the world, playing the grieving widow. She met with lawyers to ensure the inheritance was hers. She planned memorial services, and she made sure the press saw her as a victim, not a murderer. Every move she made was carefully calculated to maintain the illusion of innocence, to keep the suspicion at bay. But no amount of money, no amount of manipulation, could protect her from the truth. Detective Rachel Adams and her team had pieced everything together. Marcus's body had been discovered 2 days after the confession, hidden in a remote part of town, just as Jessica had planned. The toxicology reports confirmed the poison, and the evidence was damning. Laura's confession had been the final piece of the puzzle, but Rachel knew it was only a matter of time before Jessica's world came crashing down. The arrest wasn't dramatic. It wasn't like something out of a movie, with sirens blaring and dramatic confrontations. Jessica had no idea what was coming when she sat in her luxurious living room, sipping coffee, reading through documents. She hadn't even heard the officers arrive at her door. When Rachel entered, the first thing she noticed was how eerily calm Jessica seemed. There was no sign of panic, no visible fear. It was as if she thought she could talk her way out of this, as if the world still belonged to her. "Jessica Thompson," Rachel said, her voice firm, "I'm arresting you for the murder of your husband, Marcus Thompson. You have the right to remain silent." Jessica's eyes widened for a split second, but then, just as quickly, she regained her composure. She put down the coffee cup and looked Rachel squarely in the eyes, a cold smile playing at her lips. "This is a mistake," she said, her voice icy. "You can't possibly think I had anything to do with Marcus's death. I loved him." Rachel didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had already heard all of this before. What mattered now was that the truth had been exposed. Jessica was taken into custody, and within hours, the media had caught wind of the arrest. The headlines were everywhere. "Grieving widow arrested for husband's murder." The story spread like wildfire. But what the public didn't know, what the police hadn't yet revealed, was just how deeply Jessica had been involved. As the investigation continued, Jessica's dark secrets came to light. Her financial troubles, her resentment toward Marcus, her manipulation of Laura, they were all part of a carefully constructed plan. The more the police uncovered, the clearer it became that Jessica had orchestrated every step of her husband's death. She had used her best friend as an unwilling accomplice, convincing Laura that they would both be free, that they would both have everything they wanted. And for a while, it seemed to work. But now, as Jessica sat in a holding cell, reality was crashing down on her. She was no longer the powerful, untouchable woman who had been able to manipulate those around her. She was just a criminal, a murderer who had crossed a line she could never return from. The trial that followed was swift. The evidence was overwhelming, and the testimonies were damning. Laura, the once loyal friend, had turned on Jessica. She had told the truth about everything: the planning, the poisoning, the cover-up. Jessica had no defense. Her lies crumbled under the weight of the truth. And in the end, Jessica Thompson was convicted of first-degree murder. The life she had once enjoyed, full of wealth, luxury, and power, was gone. Her sentence was harsh, a reminder that no amount of money could buy freedom when you had taken a life. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Rachel left the courtroom after the verdict was read, she couldn't help but reflect on the case. She had seen it all before: murder for money, lies, and betrayal. But something about this case had struck a deeper chord with her. Justice had been served. Marcus Thompson had gotten the justice he deserved, though it came too late. His family, his friends, those who had loved him, would never be the same. His death had left a void that no amount of wealth could fill. But as the camera panned out, Rachel couldn't help but think of the bigger question, of morality, of justice. Had the right person been punished? Did Jessica deserve the sentence she received? Or was her punishment just the result of her own hubris? In the end, it wasn't just about the crime itself. It was about what it revealed about the human capacity for deception, for betrayal, and for the lengths people will go to when they believe they are entitled to something. The case was closed, but the question lingered. How far would you go for wealth? How far would you go to get the life you think you deserve? As the screen faded to black, Rachel's final thoughts echoed in the silence. Justice had been served, but at what cost? This case proves that secrets never stay buried forever. No matter how perfect someone's life seems, the truth will eventually surface. Do you think justice was truly served in this case? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story gripping, make sure to subscribe for more true crime stories that explore the darkness hidden behind closed doors.